Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for an important and timely discussion around making remote work. Today's topic will be around the importance of securing identities with multi-factor authentication. Today's webinar will be recorded, and everyone will be receiving a link to it after the call. Every registrant will also be receiving a $25 DoorDash gift card in that follow-up email as a thank you for joining us this close to lunch hour here. As a quick introduction to the speakers, my name is Omar Zarabi. I am the president and CEO of Port53. I will be joined today by Zoe Lindsay, a lead security strategist at Duo. Throughout the conversation, we kindly ask that everyone please stay on mute. There is a chat room on the right side of the WebEx platform. If any questions arise during the presentation, please feel free to chat it there, and we will have about 10 to 15 minutes at the end to address them. So to walk quickly through the agenda on what we'll be covering today, just at a high level who Port53 is. From there, we'll go ahead and discuss just a little bit about the state of now, sort of, some of the trends that we've seen over, especially these last 3 months with everyone having to adapt to this new way of work. From there, we'll pass it over to Ms. Zoe Lindsay for her to walk through the benefits of Duo and MFA, as well as a quick, short demo of the actual platform. And then from there, we'll discuss best next steps on how you can get started today. And as I mentioned, we'll save some time at the end just for some Q&A and an ability for us to address the questions that arise. So, for everyone that's new to Port53, Port53 started here in 2016, really with the goal of helping organizations of all sizes leverage the power and elasticity of the cloud to not only attain an enterprise-grade level, a big data-driven and proactive security posture to protect against today's most advanced and sophisticated attacks, but also helping organizations of all sizes in laying the security foundation down so moving forward, they can really safely, securely, and confidently adopt more cloud-delivered and hosted and SaaS applications. Over the last few years, we've worked with thousands of organizations of all sizes with the ability to leverage the power and the elasticity of the cloud as a delivery mechanism. We're able to deliver that same level of enterprise security and protection and integration to organizations, whether you're a 5-person company or a 5,000-person company. So, with that in mind, really helping organizations and staying ahead of the trends that we're seeing and really laying the security groundwork so organizations can continue their digital transformation. And digital transformation, it's funny, I actually saw a meme on LinkedIn a couple of days ago that read, who led the digital transformation of your organization? Was it your CIO? Was it your CEO? Or was it COVID-19? And really, over the last 3 months, what we've seen is, although digital transformation was, deemed to be more of an enterprise sort of journey that larger enterprises took, due to COVID-19, it really forced all organizations of all sizes to really lean into these major shifts that we're seeing going on in IT. Those two major shifts over the last 5 to 10 years, first off, has to do with the move to the cloud. And we're not just talking about moving infrastructure to the cloud, really talking about SaaS applications and software being used and being hosted, all over the world. And then the second big shift that we've really seen is this move towards a mobile workforce. And I'm sure everyone's really experienced this over the last 2 to 3 months. Really having work change from being a place that we go to rather something that we do. So with these two major shifts that have been going on over here, we've seen that cybersecurity has tended to kind of stagnate and keeping up with how fast these shifts have sort of occurred. So this old way of work that we've seen, the sort of traditional way of work that we discussed, where your users all came to the office, where all your applications were hosted internally in private data centers, and all your endpoints were behind the network and the firewall. Well, we've all come to understand that this old way of work is no longer so. So with this digital transformation and all organizations really, having to force to adopt this new way of work, we've seen that, applications have moved to the cloud. Organizations are allowing employees to use their own devices, and really, organizations leveraging more and more SaaS applications in a rapid manner to be able to empower and enable their employees to get work done. So with this new way of work, it's really important to understand that we've seen a shift in really the foundation of cybersecurity. Prior, to this digital transformation, if you talk to a lot of people, they would say that, the foundation of cybersecurity really is protecting your perimeter, right? Sort of the old castle and moat analogy where, you have your firewall and everyone that's behind the firewall is protected. Well, as we've seen with this erosion of the perimeter, it's really important now to look at cybersecurity and the foundation of it, not from a firewall standpoint, but rather from the connectivity as well as from the identity standpoint. And that's what our conversation is about today. Really looking at moving towards, not looking at security from a castle and moat standpoint, but rather really moving towards this zero trust environment. And I know zero trust tends to be a big buzzword, and it can very well be very complicated. But breaking it down, really it comes down to three pieces for zero trust. First off, zero trust around your workload. Making sure that applications are talking to what they need to be talking to and not having access to what they don't need to have access to. Then it's your workspace. So really creating a zero trust environment around your network. And then lastly, and most importantly, especially with the shifts that we've seen in IT over the last few months, the zero trust around your workforce, which is really your users and the way that they have access to different applications and different resources internally. So on that topic, I'm really excited to introduce Ms. Zoe Lindsay from Duo, a lead security strategist, to talk to us a little bit more about Duo and how it can be your first step towards moving to a zero trust environment. Zoe?
Absolutely. Thanks, Omar. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. So as you got in the intro here, we've seen a major transformation in what our network environments look like over the last digital generation or so. And if we were to simplify that to kind of back of the napkin network layout, right, it might look like something like this, where we have a environment of user workstations to manage alongside our administrative tools, our identity service or directory, our productivity tools like email and collaboration suites, all of that being protected behind a hardened perimeter managed through firewall rules, through a NAC, etc. This is probably a little bit closer to what we're looking at today. Over the last dozen years or so, we've seen not only users expect the same flexibility to work from wherever they are, whatever device they're on, the same flexibility that they've seen in the consumer space for the applications that they rely on. But as this technology has become more developed and more sophisticated, increasingly, the administrative tools, even the identity tools that we rely on, may not live inside of our traditional network anymore either. So with decades, literally, to build and refine the strategy to protect this kind of traditional network, which may have an added on VPN component, we've got well-defined strategies, well-developed tools to address it. But there is still, even now, this open question of the best way to handle this wider, expanded perimeter. And the problem is not that there's a lack of tools available on how to address these challenges. Rather, it's kind of the opposite. There's a ton of tools available, most of them focused on fixing a specific aspect of visibility or control for a specific service or a specific aspect of service. And complexity is hard to secure. The more areas that you or your admins need to keep track of, the more likely it is that something falls through the cracks and gets overlooked. So if we want to take a step back and reevaluate how we approach this, we can start by looking at the ways that attacks tend to happen today. In that traditional network, we saw network-focused attacks, where an attacker would try to get a foothold anywhere that they could in that network, focus on attacking network vulnerabilities themselves or vulnerable systems on the network, even if they are unrelated to the final goal, so that once inside that hardened perimeter, they can then pivot towards whatever data or resource is that actually their ultimate goal. Today, we're seeing that shift. We're seeing more data-focused attacks that are going directly after the end target, primarily by exploiting identity, because this is the most reliable way to gain access to that data, whether it is in a local or a hosted environment. And these attacks are still typically happening through phishing attacks. We are seeing a resurgence in these last several months, especially in ransomware attacks, used as the noisy cover for a more persistent either surveillance or financial data gathering attack. So if we consider what security at its most fundamental level boils down to, security is the interaction between people and technology. Most commonly, when we think about this in terms of the workforce, security happens every time that a user interacts with or requests access to a system. And so if we want to answer the core problem, we need to figure out how you tell the difference between an end user and an attacker. And while this may sound simple on its face, it can pose a more challenging problem. If we take a look at the most common causes of data breaches, we see that the large majority of breaches, 81%, involve weak or stolen user credentials, and 70% involve compromised devices. Now, these are not mutually exclusive. Oftentimes, both of these elements will play a factor in a breach, but we know that the two most common elements in a successful breach are an exploited or a stolen user identity and a vulnerable exploited device. So if we want to break our security down to its fundamentals, we need to step back and answer the questions: how do you stop attacks that use stolen but legitimate credentials? And how do you prevent devices that pose a higher risk because of their poor security hygiene from accessing your critical applications where your sensitive data is stored? One answer to this that you've certainly heard discussed in the last several years is a zero trust model. And zero trust, I want to mention, is really a larger concept. It's an extension of a lot of the fundamentals that we have followed for years and years, like least privileged access. It's expanding that idea beyond a perimeterized environment and saying instead, do not assume or inherit any trust, establish it at that moment. And when we're applying that to the element of access to systems, you can define that as a zero trust strategy is in play every time an access decision is made, rather than simply allowing a user based on the network that they're originating from. You are doing an on-the-spot check and validating at that moment whether the user should or should not be granted access. For a very brief history of how zero trust has evolved, the conversation really started about 13 years ago now at the Jericho Forum, a meeting of international business organizations, kind of doing a meeting of the minds to look at what was coming down the line over the next dozen years or so and how to prepare to address it. In 2010 is really when we started to get the moniker of zero trust in a paper issued by John Kindervag. And in 2014, we started to see the first large-scale documented implementation of a zero trust environment in Google's Beyond Corp initiative. In 2014, they issued their preliminary paper with the planned rollout. In 2016, they provided us a progress update. And in 2017, they gave a follow-up paper on the findings from their migration, what they found about the user experience and lessons learned in that deployment. And I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. But first, I want to mention, because this is where Duo comes in. One of the biggest findings, and we're going to talk about it more in a moment, but one of the biggest findings that Google found in their evaluation is that usability is a key function. Consistency and usability are key functions in the success of adopting a new login process. And that's why Duo has focused not only on being secure, but also being the world's easiest multi-factor authentication. Focusing on usability and making an intuitive process for users reduces the headaches and hassles to roll out, reduces help tickets, both on the deployment and on an ongoing basis, and gives users a more positive experience when interacting with security. Now, not all multi-factor is the same. There is a wide breadth of effectiveness based on the type of multi-factor authentication that we're talking about. So I mentioned this, there is a great study that Google did in concert with Berkeley, I believe, University, researching the various methods of multi-factor authentication and how effective they were at the largest volume of attacks that we see, which is automated account takeover attempts. And you may or may not be able to read everything on this graphic. I'd encourage you to go to the link that's listed for a full walkthrough. But you can see here there's a huge variance between 10% effectiveness at blocking phishing attacks by knowledge-based challenges. These would be your security questions, and 94% or better of phishing attacks blocked by device-based challenges. So what they're saying here is when you're looking at multi-factor authentication, you're looking at the various options that are available. You can consider strong multi-factor as having two or more factors of something you have, something you know, or something that you are. We know that security questions are not terribly effective, which shouldn't be terribly surprising to us either, because we know that that's not truly a strong second factor. You're combining something you know, your username and password, with something you know, the answer to your security question. So when we're talking about multi-factor, we're talking about strong multi-factor options using another option beyond something that you know. So when we're talking about push, we're talking about Duo rather. Push is the most common way that users will authenticate. You saw a screenshot of it and you'll see it during our demo. But this is a unique device-based challenge, distinct from something like a phone callback, which you see listed separately. A phone callback uses a phone number, which is tied to a device or to multiple devices, but can change. Duo Push is using a unique device-generated private key certificate that's stored on that user device. So that is truly a unique device-based challenge. That is an interactive prompt that requires either Wi-Fi or cell network connectivity. If you don't have that, you can still authenticate using Duo Mobile with a soft token. You can also use telephony-based methods for users without smartphones through SMS passcodes, either a single or a batch, as well as phone callback to either a cell phone or a landline. And then we also support some of the newer options like U2F, the web-based authentication standard championed by the FIDO Alliance, as well as wearables like Apple Watch and Android Wear OS, biometrics on supported devices, and hardware tokens. Now, I would never be so gauche as to humble brag about how great we are. I just happen to have this slide slid in here that lists some of the reasons why we're super great. And I like to take a moment and just leave it up while I talk about it, but I would never read it off. What I do want to tell you about is our vision today at Duo, which is easy and effective security for every user on all devices and applications that they rely on wherever they are. So our goal in doing this was to make something that you could rapidly stand up that was going to be easy for administrators and easy for users. Our first step in that process was following what then was the leading edge of the trend and building a cloud-based infrastructure. So today we aren't going to delve too deep into the nuts and bolts of implementation of Duo. I would encourage you to join our bi-weekly Getting Started with Duo webinar if you want to see more details on that. But I think that it helps to understand at a very high level what the authentication flow is for an application that it has access protected by Duo. Step one here is the user goes to log into that service. Primary authentication flow does not change. If that is being authenticated against Active Directory locally within your environment, if that is being authenticated as a SAML authentication for a cloud-based service, primary authentication flow still happens the same way that it did before you implemented Duo. After primary authentication is passed, the username and password have been validated successfully. Then that service is going to reach out to Duo, and Duo is going to check with the user in step 3 that they have the device or that they have the authentication factor that is listed for them. If they are able to successfully confirm, that is passed back to Duo, who then notifies the system programmatically, and then the user is granted access. The reason that I like to walk through this is because I think that it's important to understand that A lot of times there's initial concern about using a cloud-based authentication service because admins don't want to pass their user credentials outside of their environment. You don't have to. If you're validating locally against Active Directory today, you still do that primary authentication against Active Directory tomorrow when Duo is in place. So primary authentication is still being owned by your server or by the identity service that you rely on today. Secondary authentication is being handled by Duo. The other benefit of this setup is that rather than having to stand up an entirely new system within your environment, when you're implementing Duo, you're really just adding a reference to pause after primary authentication, but before the user is reaching that resource, pause there and do the secondary authentication through Duo. So that means that real time, you can, in most cases, go from starting a Duo trial to having a working implementation in an hour or less conservatively, in many cases, half an hour or less. As Omar said a little bit earlier, when we're considering the new perimeter, we need to account for everything that our old perimeter, our traditional network covered, but we also need to take into account our remote employees, the cloud applications that we rely on, user-owned as well as corporate managed mobile devices, hybrid cloud solutions that include both an on-premise as well as a hosted element, user personal devices, and then that painful lesson that I think the whole industry learned starting with that Target hack years ago, making sure that vendors and contractors are covered. As I mentioned, in that takeaway report from Google's BeyondCorp initiative, they found that consistency was one of the most key predictors to the success of rolling out BeyondCorp to a new business unit. If there was a single well-communicated change to the user's process for logging on or accessing that resource, they found, by and large, a positive response. There were still a limited number of help tickets, but a much lower total volume, much lower delay and enrollment and pushback. Whereas the more variance there was, the more systems or processes they had to learn, the more resentful users were of that process, the more likely it was that they were trying to find a shadow IT solution around the new process, and the more problems there were in continuing to manage. So this just goes back to the foundation that, along with considering confidentiality, integrity, and availability as the tent poles of security, we also need to consider, if not convenience, at least usability, because good UX supports good security. An example of this that I like to point to, every year Duo does a trusted access report based on our findings from millions of devices, tens or hundreds of millions of actual authentications. And we kind of collect these findings and share them in a state of the industry report, trusted access report. I'd encourage you to check it out. One of the findings from a couple of years ago was that there was a significant difference in the likelihood that a device that supported a biometric factor to unlock would have a lock screen in place versus devices that did not. So for devices that had a biometric factor, Face ID, Touch ID, fingerprint scanner, 93% of those devices had a lock screen enabled, meaning if any random person picks up that device if lost, that data is still being protected. It's not universal, absolute security that that device cannot be compromised, but it drastically reduces the risk of data loss from the most common threat, which is some random person picking that up. Whereas devices that only supported a PIN or a pattern to unlock, 78% of those devices had a lock screen enabled. So just by adding a simpler option for users to unlock their screen, it greatly increased the likelihood that those users would implement that security measure. Now, if we look at absolute risk levels, we are seeing an increase in absolute risk there, right? Because we're talking about, now there's two ways that that user can unlock the phone, with the PIN or with their fingerprint scan. But in terms of the realistic risk, which is that lost device being unsecured, picked up, and that data being lost, is drastically lowered. So by balancing that usability and that absolute security and assessing the likelihood as well as the total impact of risk, you're able to really build a security strategy tailored to those users' needs. And this is really where, when we're talking about zero trust, you can't start with the strategy you have today and tomorrow move to a zero trust strategy. It's not a single step. It's not even a single project, but something that you apply to different elements of your security strategy. When we're talking about get back there. When we're talking about user access and maturing a zero trust model, the baseline starts with confirming user identities, right? This is implementing multi-factor. If you don't have this in place and you take nothing else away from everything that I'm saying, do that today, right now, please get it in place. But after that, we need to kind of zoom back from the user and consider the other elements in that access attempt. You've got a device, the device that they're accessing on, and potentially a separate device that they are authenticating with. That's going to be accessing. They're connecting through a network. So you want to get some visibility on the other elements of that access and start to build an inventory of devices that are granting, gaining or granting the access approval. Once you have that visibility, you need to ensure device security by implementing a control policy to determine whether or not, based on the visibility that we've gained, we should allow access or not. And as I just mentioned, not every tool is the same. Not every user interacts with a tool in the same way. And considering that we need to tailor usability as well as security, we need to make those access policies contextual, stepping up security where it's appropriate and streamlining the process for users where sensitive data would not be placed at risk. Finally, once we've established each of these stepping stones, we're well positioned to quickly stand up and secure access to all other applications in our environment. One of the nice things about this approach is every new device that gets enrolled on every previous integration helps streamline and speed the process of deploying to future integrations. Each policy that you create, each device that you enroll, each user that is enrolled is then positioned to immediately launch for the next integration that you need to use. I want to tie this to a couple of stories quickly. So talking about confirming user identities, I think this is something that we're seeing a lot of businesses go through right now as they're very rapidly expanding their remote workforce, right? Duke came to us because they had a problem with account takeover. It's extremely difficult if you're unfamiliar with protecting a higher education environment. You've got a huge variety of systems and use cases, oftentimes a huge variety of compliance standards that need to be met throughout the institution. A huge user base with varying levels of control that you can enforce over those users between students, staff, and faculty. And so they were looking for a way to reduce the frequency and likelihood of account takeover. They knew that multi-factor was going to be an effective measure, but they weren't sure the best way to launch it to 54,000 total users. They implemented Duo, and they were able to get those users enrolled, I believe, in the span of 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I can't see the part of my screen that has that in the speaker notes, but in a matter of weeks, they were able to enroll 54,000 students, faculty, and staff, leveraging the self-enrollment interface that Duo has available. Moving on to access visibility, I like to use the example of Centura Health, who was a health organization already using an MDM provider to meet their HIPAA requirement to secure devices. At the time that we started introducing more of these zero trust features, allowing visibility and policy control, we talked with our customers that were already using multi-factor like Centura and gave them the option to try it out. Centura said, actually, we're good. We've got MDM. We have a handle on the security of our devices. We told them it was a new feature. Since they were already customers and we would offer a new customer this to try out, they were welcome to try it out for 30 days. And what they found is that they had done a great job of securing everything in their environment. I think somebody just came off mute, if you want to double check there. But then they found that they had almost 30,000 additional unidentified devices. 50% of which were not compliant. So they had done a great job of securing their environment and everything that they control direct access to. But what they found is that for other services that had a direct login screen, that doctors, physicians, student, faculty, and staff could go, the doctors and physicians could reach directly, They weren't getting visibility on those authentications, and so they weren't aware that those devices that did not meet their own security standards were up to date. They were able to not only secure those devices and build policies through Duo that covered them, but they were also able to scale back their MDM investment while meeting their HIPAA compliance requirements. ProQuest is another organization that we worked with that works across 18 countries, each of them with their own unique requirements. And so they are able to tailor those regional security policies, not only their application or organization specific policies, and leverage tools like self-remediation, which you can see a screen cap of here, where a user who does not meet the policy can be communicated with directly by that authentication prompt, notifying them either that they are out of compliance and need to complete an update, which is what the orange banner that you see here is, or can actually be blocked if their device is so far out of compliance that it could pose a risk. And so by doing this, they're able to reduce the amount of downtime for users while maintaining their security standards and reducing the number of help tickets for users that might otherwise be blocked if they did not have a self-remediation option available. As I mentioned, you are able to establish trust for any device, whether that is a mobile or a laptop or desktop device. Notably, we are able to do this without having to install an MDM agent on the device. On mobile devices, you're getting this information provided by the Duo mobile application that users are walked through installing when they add their first smart device. On laptops or desktops, you're getting that information either from the user agent for any web-based application or additional context through the Duo Health application. Here's just kind of a quick breakdown on some of the high-level security telemetry that you're getting in that device visibility. For mobile devices, is that a corporate managed or a user-owned device? Does it have a biometric factor available? Does it have a screen lock enabled? Has it been rooted or jailbroken? Is the disk encrypted? What OS and version is it running? On laptops and desktops, similarly, is it corporate managed? Who owns it? OS and version, browser and version, and then higher risk plugins like Flash and Java. Are those installed and are they up to date? With that information, you are then able to start enforcing contextual access policies. So here you can see Clariant was working with their user base and needed adaptive policies that took into account not only the user's location or the network that they were coming from and the resource that they were reaching, but also the user's actual role. So here they're able to, based on whether the user exists in Duo or not, their location, whether they're using a corporate managed device, they are able to set granular policies, not only at an organizational level, but at an application and even a group specific level. Here you're seeing an example where a user is actually being blocked. We're still communicating to them. They are not able to gain access because their device is out of date, but here there is a quick link that will walk them through adding it. Here we have a visual example of a security policy example. So Centara Healthcare here wants to deny access to physicians if they are approving their authentication with a device that does not have a screen lock enabled. So here you see for any of the applications they're reaching out to that they are accessing or approving from a secured device, they're granted access. If that mobile device does not have a lock screen enabled and does not meet the security policy, they'll be blocked. And as you continue to build that database, you're able to secure access to all applications and streamline that access. Here you're seeing Sophos, an organization that had literally thousands of applications deployed throughout their environment, that was able to simplify and centralize access, maintaining the authentication flow for their users on hardware that was within their local environment. And for web-based or for hosted applications, we're able to centralize access through the Duo Access Gateway. I think a nice way to sum this up is something that our customers Clarity Insights said during a case study interview we did with them, where Clarity Insights was 100% cloud-based right from the outset. They knew they didn't want to manage any local infrastructure. And so they built their security strategy around a multi-tool approach to enforce multi-factor, establish a trust score for endpoints, determine the device posture on that endpoint or on the mobile device that the user was relying on, and from all of that information, determining a trust score to determine whether or not access should be granted. Now, with Duo in place, they are using Active Directory, I think actually Azure AD now, to handle the identity, and Duo is handling everything else. I think also it's important to let you know that Duo supports all of the applications that you rely on, both local and hosted. If there isn't a drop-in native integration available, there is almost always a generic or widely applicable version available, like a Radius integration. We also have a generic SAML integration for any cloud-hosted applications that we don't have a drop-in integration for, and so forth. So this is the end of our deck, but before we switch back to that, I just very quickly want to show what a user authenticating through Duo would see. And I'm actually going to show just the self-remediation version here. So here we have a user that's going to get logged in. They go to the same place that they've always gone to get logged in, whether that is logging in through a domain, through a thick client, what have you. They enter their username and password in the same location. Now here, they're getting the Duo authentication prompt, and you're seeing they're getting a notification that their browser is out of date. They can go and get more information about this right now, or if they're in a rush, they can get that notification on their device. When they open that notification, they're going to get some information, the company logo, name, the integration that they're authenticating to, who is logging in, from what IP address, and then the time of that request. If they recognize all of this, they can approve it. If they don't recognize all of this information, say that they've left the office, they're not logging onto any services, and suddenly they get this request, they can actually report this as fraudulent, and all of that contextual information is immediately provided to the admin so they can start intervening in the course of that attack. However, we'll say that they recognized it. And even if the user skips that warning beforehand, it's letting them know before they reach that resource, hey, Firefox is still out of date. Here's more information on how to update. I'm not going to go through a full intro to our admin panel, but I do want to just show you how easy it is to really tailor this. So let's go, we'll take a look at Cisco ASA here. So as you can see, for any given application, you have a global, an application, and a group-specific policy. Let's say we wanted to limit access only to North America. We can say require multi-factor from these regions and deny access anywhere else. If we want to make sure that the user has an up-to-date version of their mobile or desktop OS, you can say what qualifies as up-to-date. You can use dynamic versions provided by Duo. They'll let you know if it's less than the latest version, or if it's older than the end-of-life version. Or if you have legacy applications that need a specific version, you can set that here as well. So you can say, for example, if you have a inventory application for your warehouses that runs on Lollipop on specialized infrared scanner Android devices, they can never be updated or it would break that system. You obviously don't want Lollipop devices still getting onto other services on your environment. And so what you can do there is you can say for this application or for this group of users with these devices, they can use this static version. Everyone else must be up to date. Again, there's a ton more detail that we can dig into here, going through building an application and tailoring or customizing that policy. But for purposes of today, because we're a little bit limited on time, I'm going to pass it back over to Omar, see if we have any questions here. And I believe that you had some information on an offer that you wanted to let folks know about as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Zoe. That was extremely informative. And exactly as we talked about, and with the examples that Zoe gave, we can clearly see that Duo is, used by the largest of largest organizations. But here at Port53, we really focus on leveraging the cloud and the power of and elasticity of it to deliver these solutions to organizations of all sizes, because it's consumed at a per user model. So to get started, I think right now is probably the best time if you are interested in trialing and demoing Duo in your own environment. Because it is a 100% cloud delivered solution, we can launch a 30-day full access trial and of course, with the assistance of your Port53 account executive, as well as the Duo team, we'll actually work with you in fully deploying the solution, getting it integrated into your environment. And as an extra offer, I think, given that it is June, it's our end of quarter, and of course, as I'm sure everyone knows, July is Cisco's end of year. So it's a great time to really trial these solutions. But as an extra incentive, what we're able to do over here is actually, for all customers or all attendees who actually launch a Duo trial in June, we'll actually do a free dark web scan through our partners over at GroupSense, which is a threat intelligence as a service organization. Really look at the dark web and scan and alert you to see if any domains or any emails that are associated with your organization and your domain are already out, on the dark web via a third-party breach. So getting started is extremely simple. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that domain over there at trial.port53.com/duo. Feel free to go ahead and sign up for a trial, and we'll reach out and schedule some time to walk through a full demo and actually, like I mentioned, discuss the deployment process with you and your environment. So once again, thanks everyone for joining. I'd love to schedule or save some time to do a quick Q&A. And it looks like there are some questions here in the chat. We'll go through those questions, and then hopefully we'll have a bit of time to open it up to all attendees to ask questions. So, Zoe, the first question, an easy one: does Duo work with YubiKey?
Yeah, we sure do. Yeah, we've been a YubiKey partner for a long time. We don't sell YubiKeys directly through the site, but we do have native support for YubiKeys. If you're curious to see what enrolling, most of the newer YubiKeys will be doubling as U2F devices wherever possible. We'd encourage you to use a U2F protocol for authentication. You can actually see what that looks like. We use a YubiKey Nano as the example. If you go to that demo.duo.com address that I just went to for the walkthrough, and I believe that there's a security key demo there, you can see what that looks like. And if you're looking at a sizable deployment and you need to talk to somebody about getting a large batch of YubiKeys, we can make sure that we can talk with Port53 and get you connected. We've got our YubiKey folks that can help you out there.
Definitely. Awesome. And by the same gentleman, how well does Duo integrate in Apple environments? Apple file servers, Open Directory, etc.
So there is a Mac OS login integration now, I believe. For other system integrations, I believe that it is going to determine what the authentication protocol that's supported is. If nothing else, it should support a generic standard like Radius. But depending on the system, I would want to double check. So I would say that's something where we'll get them their Port53 manager in touch with one of our solutions engineers to go through it. Perfect.
Awesome. And then the next question: are there plans to become FedRAMP compliant and add support for integration with Microsoft 365 GCC High?
So I'll take both pieces of that. There are plans. It's actually just 7 or 8 months ago finished. So Duo is FedRAMP certified. I do not know. I know that we have a Office 365 integration. I know that we are a Microsoft partner for native integration in the Azure environment. I do not know specifically if we are partnered with the Office 365 government environment. I would have to double check with our federal team to make sure on that. But we are FedRAMP certified. We are able to support for organizations that need to have dedicated FedRAMP deployment instances too.
Perfect. Awesome. And then another final question: why should I use Duo MFA if it is built into my Office 365 license?
Maybe I don't understand. If multi-factor is built natively into Office 365?
Correct. Or if it's native within any application.
Yeah, that's a good question. And if Office 365 or Azure assets or even Microsoft systems are the sole resources that you need to support, then that might be a good solution for you. Additionally, if you're focused purely on the MFA aspect, now if you have other systems, other cloud providers, local services or local implementations like Cisco, firewalls or AMP for endpoints installed. If you're looking to integrate with additional services outside Microsoft and maintain that consistency and quality of user experience, that would be one reason to look at opting for Duo. Additionally, if you want to kind of use that wider zero trust at the level of access implementation, where each time a user connects, you're doing device analysis, network analysis, and enforcing granular policies, that would be another reason why you may want to look at using Duo. And so that's actually why Microsoft partnered with us, right? So at Microsoft MFA, Azure MFA is available for Azure deployments and for Microsoft deployments, but for users that are looking for sort of more expansive zero trust access on a wider environment support, that's why they have the native integration with Duo and why they worked with us for integration into the native login chain for Windows. So if you're logging in to actually a Windows machine rather than the normal username, password, second password that you would get if you were doing a multi-factor implementation on the login chain. Instead, you get that full Duo user interface. Hopefully that answers. If you have follow-up, I'm happy to expound further.
And then just to follow up on the FedRAMP question, it looks like Jonathan is asking, is there a conversion process from commercial to federal? And are there pricing differences? I think I think that's a great question, Jonathan, to ask the Port53 rep as well as your Duo specialist. So unless Zoe, you have a direct answer right now.
You took the words right out of my mouth. I'm sure that we're going to want to get connected with the federal team, but probably the quickest way to do that is going to be to get the Port53 manager talking to the federal team.
Awesome. And I think that concludes all the questions in the chat room. We do have another 10 to 12 minutes over here. If there are any outstanding questions that anyone would love to unmute and ask, please feel free to do so. And if not, then we'll go ahead and give you guys all the 10 minutes back on your calendars over here. As mentioned, there will be a follow-up email that will include not only a recording of this webinar, but it'll also include your gift card for the $25 DoorDash. As we promised, lunch will be on us for you taking the time to join us this close to lunch hour. So thank you all for joining. Thank you, Zoe, so much for the informative conversation here today. And we look forward to working with you all.
Thank you for joining, everybody. Have a great day. Stay healthy, stay safe.